Welcome to Step Up to the Sport, a conversation series bringing together the minds of women's baseball and women in baseball. I'm Kate Haines, the moderator of today's conversation and the archivist of the International Women's Baseball Center. Our host today will be IWBC Director, Sabre Vice President, and Kent State University at Stark Associate History Professor, Leslie Heaphy. Our guest today is Dr. Sabrina A. Brinson, and we'll be discussing her new book, Meet the Philadelphia Dolly Vardens, and her work as an educator and activist. Dr. Sabrina A. Brinson is a diversity, educational, and creative consultant, author, and a full professor at a Midwestern university. She is also a community activist dedicated to genuine equity, inclusion, and social justice for all. Her multidisciplinary scholarship includes an AA in General Studies, a BA in Psychology, a BA in English Literature, a MA in Special Education with an emphasis in behavior disorders, and a PhD in Curriculum and Instruction with an emphasis in early childhood education and reading. She teaches graduate and undergraduate courses in diversity, research methods, and child-family development. Her professional platforms revolve around 3 lines of research that include diversity, multiculturalism, and social justice, culturally sustaining literature, and social, emotional, and moral development. Her research results are published in international and national journals such as The Dragon Load, Multicultural Perspectives, and Young Children, and in book chapters, Teachers Preparation at the University Level in Barboa and Bradshaw's Autism, What Schools Are Missing, Voices for a New Path. Dr. Brinson is also a frequent presenter at international and national conferences, such as the Conference for the International Literacy Association, Conference for the National Association for Multicultural Education, and the Convention for the National Council of Teachers of English. She also provides services as a political analyst and a voice actor. Dr. Brinson's passion and advocacy for reading is reflected in the award-winning national community-based literacy program she founded and directs, Boys Booked on Barbershops and Girls Booked on Beauty Shops, and in her current initiative, Strength Beyond Measure, Reading for Ingenuity and Resilience. It is a series of culturally sustaining children's books designed as curricula for overall health advancements of students. Meet the Philadelphia Dolly Vardens is the first book in the series. So welcome, Leslie and Dr. Brinson. It is good to have you guys. I'm going to turn it over to Leslie for our conversation today.
Thanks, Kate. We appreciate that introduction, and I'm really excited to talk to you today, Dr. Brinson. Reading your bio and listening to Kate, we were talking earlier, you must be incredibly busy all the time. The array of things that you do is pretty astounding. And so I always like to start when we're talking to somebody to help our listeners get to know the person a little bit, to tell us a little bit about your background and how you got interested in some of the particularly, obviously one of your key focuses is early childhood and reading. So how did you get interested? Where did all this come from?
So I always say that my activism and my activities come from happenstance and passion. And so just in general, even when I was in school, I've always had a love of reading, and that's where the early literature degree came from. And then I also had an opportunity to work with children who had a variety of special needs. And what it really came clear to me is that a lot of people tend to think, if you're different or have special needs, that means there's some kind of deficiency. And of course, we know that's not true, because for all of us, we have differences that make us unique. And with that, I wanted to really invest time in making sure that everybody understands, be it if it's with my preschoolers or elementary age, or even as a teacher educator, that the goal is for us to actually, if there are any issues, to address those, but while simultaneously tapping into the strengths so that we can be our best authentic selves. And so, of course, what's really important, going back to the early childhood, is as soon as possible and for as long as possible, we want to make sure that children really have the opportunity to progress overall. And a lot of times we think about the cognitive or the physical development, but we tend to forget about the emotional, the social, and even the moral development. And particularly now when we look at the climate of our country, when we look at how much hatred we have and all of the violence and, you know, the frustration and people thinking about revenge and things. And so for me, it's really important to say these things aren't just in pockets. We have to actually look at each individual and then also collectively, how do we want these next generations that are coming up to be? And that is why I said, as soon as possible, we want to nurture the social and the emotional and even the moral development. People forget you have to teach right and wrong, because when you don't, that's when we see a lot of times these young people who are doing these really frightening things. And a lot of reasons because they have no moral compass. And so that part is important, along with, and I think now, particularly with the pandemic, we don't pay enough attention to the social and the emotional aspects too. Think about how disruptive it was just right now. Okay, we're moving along, we're going. If I'm a preschooler or I'm a child with special needs or anybody, I've been going to school, all of a sudden I'm yanked out and we were closed for a while. What does that say? And then emotionally, kind of what's going on with all of that? How do I handle that? And even when we try to shelter our young children, they sense it, they can feel the anxiety, or as I said, there's something going on, I'm not quite sure what. Mommy seems to be anxious all the time, and so they're feeding off of that. And so for me, it was a combination of looking at what my passions were, what my areas of expertise were, and integrating all of those into what I say, making sure that everybody has the opportunity to be their best authentic selves. And so all of that really came out of my commitment to being a community activist.
It's so incredible to hear when you get the opportunity to pull together all those pieces, what you love yourself, and be able to turn that into something. And I really wanted to ask folks a little bit on, as you mentioned, you know, as we all know, the world is it's a crazy place right now.
Yes.
For a whole variety of reasons. And so I was curious about, and you've sort of addressed, but how that has impacted what you do, particularly, as you pointed out, this whole issue of kids and being in school and not being in school. How has that impacted what you're doing, and potentially how you're thinking about, particularly maybe both the kids and training teachers, because this is going to continue at least for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, it is. And again, as we say, it's just a time of change. But as I do say, as a teacher educator, when I'm teaching, like I tell my students, I say the one quality you need to have is adaptability. Because the one thing you can count on in life is change. And so you're right, we're up, we're down, and we're all around. Now, again, as a community activist, one of the things I did a couple of years ago, it was the 50th anniversary of Reverend Dr. King's passing. Mm-hmm. And so everybody wanted to commemorate that. And I was at a national conference and presenting and talking, and I kept saying, well, everybody's talking about all these neat things they're doing, but I haven't heard anything in my hometown. So it's like, you know what? Oh, I guess that should be you. And so what I did at the time was, again, I didn't want to just commemorate the 50 years of his passing. I wanted to say this is a time when we can utilize this as an opportunity to really take up his legacy. And so what I did was form what's called the MLK Commemorations Committee. And it is made up of a variety of educational institutes here in Springfield. Then we also have businesses and entrepreneurs. We have our public library system. We have our art museums. And the goal was, as I said, to, yes, commemorate his passing, but then to also, in Reverend Dr. King's stead, to take up his legacy of education and service. And our overall ongoing goal is to have a multifaceted, positive impact in our community. And so, having said that, when, you know, the virus kind of struck and everybody was relegated to their homes, I started thinking about exactly those kinds of things. And again, going back to, wow, this is just a huge transition for all of us, with our children, with our families, with our young adults having to come out of school. And so for me, I thought about that and I said, you know what, at this point in time, again, emotionally, we all need some comfort. And how do we maintain our wellness? And so what we decided to do then was we are doing a series of ongoing virtual support, and it's the MLK system of care. And what we do is through a variety of YouTube videos, we actually disseminate these into our community. So for example, on the first one, now I recognize and respect everybody's beliefs as far as faith or the lack thereof. But on the first one, we have like a segment that really is about inspiration, and it's titled, "This Too Shall Pass." And so the goal of that is to give people inspiration. Now, along with that, that's it to think, okay, when we think about this virus, what are some of the primary topics, or what are some of the primary issues? And so along with that too, what we did was to say, we actually had a nurse practitioner to kind of talk to women and inform about the breast exams and heighten awareness about breast cancer. For a lot of people don't even know that 1% of men get breast cancer. So she did a segment on that. And then unfortunately, when we think about some of the issues, so for one is domestic violence. And unfortunately, being relegated to home, that really puts a lot of people at a deeper risk. So we had somebody who's a domestic violence advocate to kind of talk about those kinds of things. Now I know there's some people say, well, the kids don't really need to wear a mask, some do, but when you think about older kids, they do. And having said that, I tapped into the expertise of one of the students, and she actually did a little segment on the mask. And so in general, again, we think about those little things. Could you imagine, even if you're not, okay, I've seen mommy and daddy, and all of a sudden, here are these masked people. Could you imagine what that looks like? Some of the kids is like, wait a minute, who is this? Even with me, my little Shakespeare, he's a little Mickey dog. And when I put mine on, he looks at me in the strangest way. And I have to say, it's still mommy. It's just mommy with the mask.
Right.
And so we did a segment on that. Now also too, with the education, some are in school, some are not in school, some are in school part-time. And so again, to have educators to say, here are kind of some tips. These are some things that you can do at home with your children, because I think we forget how overwhelming that can be. It's like, okay, now their education is in my hands. Yep. And so as I said, we provided some tips to kind of really talk about that, about some things you can do. And it's not as daunting as you would think. And I'll talk more about that later, because for me, when it comes to education, and in particular reading, for example, people quite often want to be product oriented. Let me just get this task done. Well, yes, we want the task done. So I'm not saying don't complete it, but the goal is to get the child actively involved in the task so that the child can have a sense of commitment or a sense of ownership. Right. And so we had somebody to talk about that. And then even going up with our young adults. Remember, our young adults, a lot of them, they have jobs or they're in school, and all of a sudden that stopped. And so I'm really big on tapping into the strengths of the community. In other words, let's go into the community, people who have the expertise in it, they're able to talk. And what that does is that strengthens our universal community. And so even for my nephew, he was in his first year at the university. Well, boom, they had to come home. And I had a conversation with him, and I was thinking about, it's like, okay, you kind of had your routine going, you had a plan, but I said, right now with young adults, with them, how do we get young adults to adapt and to really still be productive? And so he does a segment that basically kind of talks about 3 things that he wants to look at during that time. He's a musician, and so he, of course, talked about enhancing being a musician. He plays all kinds of drums and piano and things, and now he wants to do the bass guitar. He's a business major, so he talked about that too, really honing his program of studies. And then also, as he says, he's like, well, I'm young now, so I want to stay that way. So we put a segment in there about that to encourage our young people. Yes, life as you knew it has been disrupted, but you really can transition and be effective and successful in that. And along with that too, I also had a grad student who her professional platform is financial literacy. And so she did a wonderful segment directed towards young adults about financial literacy. And so that's one of the things that we're doing. Again, these are ongoing videos, and that's the goal of them, to disseminate into the community, to really provide that support as we kind of maneuver and navigate our way through this. Other things we've done too is, because we do have the educational institutes, we've kind of tapped into those to say, are we really making sure that our children and their families have support? And so again, I recognize and respect everybody's beliefs as far as faith, whether they are people of faith or the lack thereof, but our faith-based institutes have been staples in our communities for generations. And so, as we've always done, basically, faith-based institutes have really kind of stepped up to say, this is a place too where we can provide some of the tutoring or some of the lessons, or even the primary caregivers, you know, the mother, father, whoever the primary caregiver is, they can come here and kind of get some tips. And so they've been providing some classes and providing some support also, because that's the goal, to say we all have to be in this, but we want to navigate it successfully.
That's amazing.
That's awesome.
Now your resume makes a great deal of sense.
And the YouTube channel and whatnot, I will link in our episode notes for our viewers to check out, so they can see some of your guys' community work.
Wonderful. And again, that's the whole thing. It's really twofold, because for one, for me, is to just do that, to actually tap into the community capital. Because a lot of times when people think about certain communities, oh, well, they always need help. No, they are the help. Right. And that's what I said. I actually went into the community, people who had the experiences or the expertise. And so, as I said before, we utilize the people from the community to disseminate this information for our universal community as far as strengthening it. And that too did a lot to, I think, alleviate some of the stigmas that we tend to have about some of our underserved communities. Absolutely. Because when it comes to those, we typically think, oh, I need to ride in on a white horse and save them. And so, as I always tell people, no. Let the horsey rest, give him some carrots, and then go in. And you know what you need to do? Go in and listen to see how you can support whatever efforts they are doing, and to recognize that within every community, if they are still alive, if they don't have anything else, they have resilience. And so to tap into the strength of the community while simultaneously addressing any needs. But again, I say from a support position first, and then to say, hey, if there are some gaps or things, what is it that I can do? What do you need from me? So I'm really pleased about that part.
That's a message that we all need to take to heart, and we need to pay attention to, because there are resources, all kinds out there. And speaking of resources, so before we get to the book I really want to talk about, I would also like to hear a little bit about your series, Boys Booked on Barbershops and Girls Booked on Beauty Shops. Can you tell us a little bit about, I mean, it just sounds amazing. And I'm sure that people are wondering what that's all about.
Absolutely. And so again, when you ask me, how did you come up with all of that? As I said, I always had a passion for reading. I've just loved reading ever since I was a little girl. And so, as I said, when I actually went to college myself, I knew I wanted to major in psychology, but you have all these electives. I'm thinking, well, you know what? I love reading, and also I had a second major in English literature. And that is so important. In particular, the reading part, what people don't really make the connection of, reading is integrated into every content area that we have, be it math or science or history. Mm-hmm. And so because of that, and this is where young children, it really comes in. What's really scary is they actually use some of the third grade reading levels to start thinking about how many prisons we're going to need by the time those students are 18 years old. And what is frightening is we are now building more prisons than schools. And so for me, it's like, okay, this is a huge issue. So on the one hand, yes, we have a lot of students who are illiterate. They literally can't read. But we actually have more students who are what we call illiterate. And illiteracy means you can read, but you lack the motivation. And so because of that, I thought, our students need to have a full circle of opportunities at home, school, and community to actually read and engage. And so having said that, that is how the programs, Boys Book Done Barbershops and Girls Book Done Beauty Shops, was born. Again, going back into the community, the barbershops and the beauty shops have been staples of the community for generations. And you sit there and you're waiting to get your hair groomed. And so that was the perfect place. And what I did was I partnered with a wide variety. We have Mocha Moms, we have chapters of the NAACP, there are reading groups, because it is all over America. And so what happens is I partner with the group, and then they, in their community, they identify the barbershop or the beauty shop at hand. And so once they've identified that, now I say, tell me about the demographics of the patrons. And so they tell me the ages. I think about whether it's somebody in the South, the North, is it people who have English as a second or a third language, the different ages of them. And so with that said, what I do then, and this is where the culturally sustaining books come into place. Because a lot of times, whenever you hear reading programs, people think, yay, I can clean out my garage. And you know what I say? Thank you, but no thank you. Because at that point, what I do is I select high quality, which means they're well-written books that are by and about diverse characters. And so, of course, we have books about the different ethnic groups. But again, when we talk about our diverse populations, we forget. There are books about children with disabilities. We have books from characters who are in all different kinds of socioeconomic status ranges and things like that. So again, I take these high quality books, we put in what's called a reading nook. And again, based on their ages, and while the kids are sitting there waiting to get their hair cut or groomed, if they are 1 or 2, then you've got the adult who can take the book and read aloud to them. Or if we've got like our 3rd, 4th graders or older, they can read the books themselves. Because again, that's the goal. It's one thing to not be able to read, but it's another to lack the motivation. And so that is why I say with the culturally sustaining, it does a couple of things. I can see reflections of myself, and I also get wonderful insight into the lives of others. And that motivates them to read more. These programs have been in existence since 2004. And as I said, they're all over America. And the beauty of it is, as long as you have someone who's willing to have it in their shops and you have a sponsor, it works. And then what's wonderful is when they get into the barber or the beautician's chair, the barber beautician says, okay, tell me about that book that you were reading about. And so they talk about it a little bit more. And I would say, how do we know it works? Because we have a hard time keeping the books in the barbershops and the beauty shops because kids want to take them home. And that's a wonderful problem to have.
Wow, that is truly incredible. And I think about that and I think, man, I wish they'd had something like that when I was a kid, because I like you, been a reader since I was, and recognize the importance of that. So question popped into my head just listening to you are there ways that people can help in terms of getting the books that you need? Or how do you get those books? I mean, is there?
Well, see, that's where the partnership comes in. That's what I was saying. For example, if you identify a barbershop or a beauty shop in your particular neighborhood, talking to me about that to say, hey, I want to set up this reading nook in this particular barbershop. Okay. And that's when you and I, as the national director, I talk to everybody. I find out about the demographics. Then I provide a list of high quality books. And that is what the organization does. The organization buys the books to go into the barbershops or the beauty shops.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. Very cool. Very cool.
Really great grassroots effort.
Well, it shows, again, the strength of, as you've pointed out, the strength of communities and what we can all do to be supportive, to do and to recognize that every community has strengths and we need to work with those. So you now have this new series that has just started called Strength by Measure. And so again, the inspiration for that and all comes from your very first book and you have it on your table, and of course I have my copy right here as well, is this book, Meet the Philadelphia Dolly Vardens, a topic that most people have never heard of, know very little about. So my first question to you, before we talk about it, how did you find out about them?
Again, happenstance in a way, because I was actually just researching the Negro Baseball League in general. And I just happened to find one little nugget, and it of course intrigued me. I was like, oh my goodness. And so once I found that little nugget, I kind of followed up on it to do the research. And once I heard the story, of course I thought, oh my gosh, you know, this is perfect. This is something that people need to know. And that is where the name of the series, Strength Beyond Measure, the books that are including the Dolly Vardens, that's one of the objectives, to say, I'm going to fill some of our gaps in American history about the wonderful achievements of sometimes well-known, but more often little-known individuals. And so that was the purpose of doing that. And now it is historical fiction because there wasn't a lot, but that was my goal, to say, wow, the very first professional women's baseball team, and it was all African Americans, I've got to disseminate this. And so out of that, that is where my story was born.
Wow. So, total aside, are you a baseball fan?
I actually had not been a baseball fan. And that is the funniest thing. I tell people, I said, you know, I think I'd rather just stay home and clean the house rather than that. I really had not been. But again, once I got interested in the work that I was doing as far as the Negro baseball leagues, that really started to pique me, because again, going back to my group, the MLK commemorations, I started doing work with that and getting interested in it and following Jackie Robinson Day. And once I got into some of those things, I became a baseball fan. Even with the Negro League, when I found out there are 4 amazing women, the 3 who actually played.
Yep.
Okay, so when Jackie Robinson went down, when I'm like, they actually replaced it with Toni Stone, a woman, and then Mamie Peanut Johnson and Constance Morgan. So I was so impressed with that. And by the way, a lot of people don't know, but Connie Morgan, her batting average, oh my, it is amazing. And also the 4th one, who was really fascinating, Effa Manley. Now, her and her husband, they were co-owners of one of the teams. And then when he passed on, oh my gosh, she stepped up. Not only was she an owner, she became an advocate for all of the players as far as them being treated better and being paid well. She even had an air-conditioned bus for her team. And what really amazed and astounded me was that she was the first woman inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 2006, and she is still the only woman. So with that, I started to really love baseball, because I really love the stories about the baseball players. And really, that's my goal. People forget we all have multiple dimensions to us. And so learning about the different dimensions and the different passions of people, or even the people who played, again, with the 3 women and with Effa Manley, I was so impressed when I found out Charlie Pride used to be in the Negro Baseball League. For people who don't know, he's African-American, probably what would have been known as the first African-American superstar country singer.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, oh my gosh. Yeah. It was just a treasure trove for me. So yes, I am now a baseball fan.
Well, there's no better way to become a baseball fan than that, because that is, for most of us, it's, yes, the baseball, but it's also the stories. And for me, that's always been, because my area is the Negro Leagues, is their stories. And it seems to me that the Dolly Vardens fit all of your goals.
Yes.
Because here, as you were talking about, even with the beauty shop program and the barbershop program, right? The idea that knowing the demographics, finding books that are appropriate, and books that will reflect. And there aren't a lot of books.
Exactly.
On particularly African-American female athletes.
Yes.
And so the Dolly Vardens story. So given the fact that the Dolly Vardens, 1883, playing in Philadelphia, very first, how did you build the story, given that there isn't a lot known?
I built it by just what I said. I was fascinated and amazed that they wanted to do it. And then when you think about the era, it's the era of Reconstruction. And so what I wanted, again, for this series is a couple of things. As I said, to really fill in some of our American gaps by letting people know about amazing people like the Philadelphia Dolly Vardens. But I also wanted to do, because some of the themes of the series is ingenuity and resilience. And so that's something that was really important to me too, as a diversity consultant. Basically, when you look at, there have been so many people from diverse populations who really have faced just unbelievable obstacles, okay? But they have actually overcome those. And that's how it was kind of woven in, that first and foremost with this series, I want people to see amazing people who made amazing accomplishments despite the obstacles. And what's important with that too, and this goes back to the social, emotional, and moral development. Every problem has a solution, but every solution may not be positive. And so I wanted to really hone in on that too, fact that yes, they were faced with obstacles, but you don't fight fire with fire. You fight fire with effective strategic plans and action steps that are going to move you forward. And so once I had all of that, that's kind of how the story kind of started unfolding. And even the part about them, because, you know, Dolly Varden was a character in Charles Dickens, and she was known for wearing these kind of loud, fancy dresses and things. And with the Dolly Vardens, it was that same thing. So I wanted to show, again, you're using it, okay, pretty much to capitalize on and exploit and for you to get rich. But I wanted to show that, hey, they were real athletes, okay? And even in these costumes, they took it seriously and they played baseball. And that is what I wanted to show, just that. It's like, we know what you're doing, but you know what? We've got some goals and some commitments ourselves. We are athletes and we're going to show you. And so even the part about the ball of yarn and being able to throw that 95 miles. So I wanted to make sure that that part was understood, that, yeah, we know what you're doing, but you know what? This is how we're going to take it and we're going to utilize it so that we can advance. And then for me, I really thought it was important to have them come together with some of the other teams in the Negro Baseball League. And again, because they are athletes, it's like, yes, these are all women and they're going to play some of the male baseball teams. And so I use that part of history because for a lot of African Americans at the time, if they were doing domestic work, they got off on Thursday nights. And so that's why I took the story there, that you're the owner and you're using us to make money and profit. We're going to play great games there. And then little do you know, we're going to be down playing real games with other real professional athletes. And so again, in the story, it's a way of showing, yeah, you may have to face adversity, but how do you face it? How do you address it? And that is where the ingenuity and the resilience comes in. And also to show, because basically some of the problems that are designed, it's designed to keep you down and to impede your progress. But you're going to be smart, and you're going to kind of be clever and figure out a way to bypass that and continue to move forward.
I love that aspect of it. And you're telling, it seems so often, and particularly I think for female athletes and then female athletes of color, often facing obstacles, recognize how they're being used. Yes. And then are able to say, okay, yeah, you can do that, but I'm going to get what I need out of this as well. And exactly. That's an amazing part of that story. So I'm curious, though I recognize the book is fairly new and it just came out this year. What has been the reaction so far to it from people who have seen it, read it? How have they, what have you heard? What's been the reaction?
Primary reaction is really what I was expected. So I'm accomplished because I didn't know there was such a team. I had never heard of that. And so again, I'm really pleased with that, because then of course people are more intrigued and start talking more. And that's where I kind of introduced, hey, did you know about the whole Negro Baseball League and that there were women who were playing? And so it gets people invested. And again, that's my goal, to say, here are some wonderful things that have happened in our history. So I'm going to fill those gaps and let you know. And then of course, that's going to motivate you to want to know more about topics like these. So that really has been it. And people have really just been like, oh my God, the ball of yarn and the costumes, you know, in the red Dolly Varden.
Yeah.
People have just been really amazed with that. But even with that, me putting in those kind of true pieces, you know, like with the Moravians and what happened. So again, it's showing people too that you can have high interest reading material that is also educationally informing. And so I've had a very, very good reception to it, and I'm really pleased about it.
As you should, because the book is amazing. And I would just tell anybody who's listening to us, and you know, I'm going to ask her here in a moment, how you need to pick this book up. You need to read it. It will intrigue you and lead you to all these other stories. And my favorite story in there is about the ball of yarn. I will say that. But I'm also, the cover is truly fantastic, because I'm going to, as you can see on this cover, and I was going to ask, this truly captures who the Dolly Vardens were in that time period. And yet you can see, even with her costume, she's a baseball player.
Yes.
And so your illustrator did a marvelous job in capturing what you wanted to capture.
Well, and I was just going to say, and the one note to that too for people, if people say, well, why is she looking so neat? I particularly requested that from the illustrator. I said, listen, these are skilled athletes. Okay, and this was a real game, and that is why she's looking like, you can try to storm that if you want to. I'm gonna run right through
over you.
And that's why he was looking like, bring it on, and she was like, you got it.
Yep, it captures. It's a marvelous. So that's really cool. That's really cool. So just out of curiosity, this is the first one. Do you have any thoughts about what the next one's going to be?
Yeah, there are actually. I do have the next two kind of lined up, but of course, I'll just put it this way. There's a secret in the secret of the next one.
Okay, cool. Now you've got me intrigued. So which is your goal, which means we're invested now in what you're doing, which is your message overall. And so now we're going to have to watch for the next one. So a sort of key important question for you. Where do people get the book?
Actually, believe it or not, they can get the book on the website, my www.drbrinsonbrand.com. So there is a wealth of information about the book on the website. There's a wealth of information about the series. There's information about the literacy programs, boys put down barbershops and girls put down beauty shops. And there is a purchasing option if they want to buy the book on the website.
And the link to that website will be in the description below and in our episode notes.
Awesome. So one final question before I'm going to turn it over to Kate to see what questions we got potentially from our social media. In all of this, as you did your research on the Dolly Vardens and then put together this wonderful piece about it, what would you say for yourself was the most interesting or most memorable part of this story?
Well, there were two. The part that when we talked about the athletes playing other athletes and the adversity that they overcame. But the most important part was to say this was back then, but bringing it to the present, where the little girl had an issue. And so that was the most important part to me. To say that even now you may face unfair things, but again, what do you do about it? Because you can give into it, and then that means that's going to impede you. Or again, you can figure it out, be resilient so that you can continue to move forward. So my favorite part is how the example that they gave, okay? You know, a lot of times we talk and don't do, but they were resilient and used ingenuity. And so she was able to take that. And I also thought it was important too, to stress hard work. That's another one of, you know, those traits that we really want people to do, to be able to work hard at it. And so that was my favorite part, when she was able to figure that part out. And even though she was disappointed, to say, okay, you know what, that's fine. I have a plan. And as she kind of walks through what she was doing now as far as her plan. And then she even says, and that doesn't work, I'm gonna go to X, Y, and Z. So that was my favorite part, to really show that interconnection between history and present and the benefits that can come from those. And one of my favorite themes is just that strong has always been the real pretty. When you think about women and athletes. So that is one of my favorite parts, and that is one of my favorite things from it.
Amazing.
Well, that's an awesome way to, I think, to end this part of the discussion is just on that thought. And just to say to you, bravo, amazing work. And I'm going to turn it over to Kate at this point to see what questions may have come in on our social media for Dr. Brinson.
Well, we just have the couple that we got kind of all go together. So I'm going to ask it as one. And it's more focused on your research and what's the most interesting thing you've researched, whether it's in your community activism or your research for your books or whatnot. What's the most interesting thing or the thing that sticks with you the most in the work that you've done in your career?
The most interesting thing, and I would say, and it is a combination of through my work as an activist in the community, the research that I'm doing is just that we talk about our society and what do we want. The most interesting, but also the most trying thing is the goal is to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to become their best authentic self. Now, what does that mean? We talk about diversity and inclusion a lot, but really what we're talking about is equity, which is fairness. And so I guess the most trying or challenging thing would probably be institutional marginalization. And again, that's where the books and all say, you know what, some things may not happen, but you can figure things out so that you can continue to move forward. And so I would say that's probably my primary, when I talk about my platform, the primary goal to continue to show that, to continue to show that we can be inclusive and we can tap into the strengths of people. When I gave the example before of the MLK Commemoration Committee, when I gave the example of the support that we're doing, going out into the community, utilizing the strengths and the experiences of people in the community. The same thing with reading, okay? We may have some kids who may struggle with reading, but there are other kids who lack the motivation because they never even can make a connection, see reflections of themselves, or there's never anything in there that they can identify with. And again, when I talk about diverse populations, that's just that it might be ethnic groups, it could be people from different geographic regions, people who have disabilities. So I think it's really important to let people understand that we have to make sure that we provide fairness for everyone. And I think the biggest challenge to that I always find is people think treating them the same. No, we don't want to treat everybody the same. Because the reality is when you treat us all the same, you really are banishing some of us or oppressing some. You want to treat people with fairness. Now, what does that mean? It means exactly that. For example, if there's a person with a disability, just give me whatever I need to accommodate that, and that's treating me fairly. Or with my series of utilizing individuals who've done these amazing things in history that nobody's heard of. That's being fair. So I would say that's probably kind of my guiding source, that equity, that inclusion, letting people know just how amazing as individuals we can be. And then also the second one goes back to what we discussed before too. Different doesn't mean deficient. Okay, and so we all have traits that make us unique, but then we also have common bonds that join us together.
That is amazing.
There couldn't be a better message for all of us.
Yeah.
As we think
Absolutely.
about, and it's important, I think, to stress that idea, and all of your work brings this out, and the Dolly Vardens story is just a part of that. Equity is about fairness.
Yes. And
that's all everyone asks for and all everyone deserves is that opportunity and for fairness. And so
and you would think it would be, it's not a hard thing, but it is. And if we all had fairness, everybody needs to have a fair opportunity to be their best authentic self. Now, once they have the opportunity, what I do with it, that's on me.
Right.
But at least
Yeah.
give me that fair opportunity. And do you know how amazing our world could be if everybody had the opportunity to be their best authentic self? And what's great about that too is I tell people now, how does you being your best authentic self threaten me? It doesn't. It makes it better for everybody.
A beautiful message, and particularly important in our world today.
Absolutely.
Because I think you just said it, allowing people to be there is no threat to anybody else. In fact, it improves for all of us. And so knowing these stories and hearing about these people helps us improve, and the world will be a better place. So
yes.
Thank you.
And again, and it also does, hopefully that's it. So we get to see our holistic history, you know, and again, some of it is what it is as far as, ooh, that wasn't too great, but we still have to kind of look at our history and see it. And then we really can learn from it. And then we really can celebrate the accomplishments. Even going back to the Negro Baseball League, now that was something else. I was really honored that my book came out during the 100-year anniversary of Negro League Baseball.
Yeah.
So once I got into baseball, I was like, oh my gosh, it's going to come out the same year. It's been 100 years. And as I said, even with that, there are so many amazing players and managers that were in Negro Baseball League, and we're finding out more and more and more about them and their dimensions and their stories.
Absolutely. And so, good reminder, this book did come out at an opportune moment. And so I would just simply say again, pick the book up. You won't be sorry. And Dr. Brinson, I can't say enough in terms of saying thank you for sharing with us tonight. This has been amazing. And hearing about all the incredible work that you've been doing, I hope is an inspiration to everybody who's going to listen to this, and will give us all thought and inspiration, maybe, for things that we could be doing and things that we should be doing. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. You're welcome.
Are you interested in keeping up with Dr. Brinson? Check out her book, Meet the Philadelphia Dolly Vardens, and check out her website, www.drbrinsonbrand.com. While you're at it, you can keep up with the IWBC at IWBC4Me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. If you're interested in becoming a member, please visit our website at internationalwomensbaseballcenter.org. If you liked our episode and are curious about our other digital content, don't forget to like and subscribe to IWBC Archive on YouTube. Thank you again for joining us for Step Up to the Sport, and thank you again to Leslie and Sabrina for this conversation. Keep an eye